Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for today's webinar, Connect Test Automation with Secure DevOps to accelerate value delivery. My name is Mark Lambert, and I'm the Vice President of Product Management at Parasoft, and I'm very, very happy to be joined today by a colleague, Nishant, who will be talking about how we can scale value delivery through the use of a scaled agile framework. Before we jump into today's session, though, let's go ahead and do a little bit of housekeeping for the webinars. So first of all, your mics are all off, everybody's muted, but please feel free to enter anything into the chat. If you have questions, there is a dedicated Q&A panel. You'll be able to answer. We'll be able to put in questions there, and then our team will be able to either answer them on the fly, or we'll actually be answering those at the end of the session. This session is going to be recorded, and we'll be using it or hosting it online. It's actually part of a webinar series that we're running at the moment during this this time when we're all very much homebound at the moment. So we're going to have a series of webinars. So look out for an email from Parasoft following today's webinar, kind of inviting you to some of the other sessions. As I said, my name is Mark Lambert. I'm the Vice President of Products. I'm joined by Nishant, who is the Agility Practice Lead at Icon Agility. But before I turn over to Nishant, just a little bit of background about Parasoft. So Parasoft has been in the industry over 30 years now, 100% focused on helping organizations implement continuous quality practices. I'll talk about what I mean by continuous quality later today and how it goes beyond the concept of continuous testing, but really how we can help you build in quality practices into your software development pipeline. We have a complete portfolio of testing technologies. I'll touch upon them all briefly today. I am going to go into a couple of them in detail. I'm going to talk about Selenium UI testing, and I'm going to talk about API testing as well. And as you can see here, we have a global presence based out of Monrovia, USA, very near Los Angeles, and recognized by the industry analysts as a leader in the test automation and quality space. And actually, we're very proud to have been chosen for the last couple of years for the Gartner Customer Choice Award. Recently, we got the 2020 award, and last year we had the 2019 award as well. So we'll talk about the technologies that actually got us those awards and the technologies that our clients are using. But before we do that, I'd like to hand over to Nishant, and Nishant, get us going, talk us through the value stream and how we can scale this within our organization.
Well, thank you, Mark. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning or good evening, wherever you are, and thank you for joining us. I'm Nishant. I'm the Business Agility Practice Lead for Icon. A little bit about Icon. We've been in business for about 27 years, helping our customers through the Enterprise Agile Transformation journey at every stage, and trying to be their partners in that journey, trying to feel their pain, meet them where they are, and take them through that process, which is the most painful thing in human life, is change. So we've been doing that for 27 years, and it's been a pleasure helping each and every client through that journey. We are also the #1 SBCT Gold partner with Scaled Agile. Scaled Agile being one of the most commonly used framework today in the market, one of the highest grade framework that is there for business agility. And we have been honored to be in that top spot all these years, trying to take that journey with them and improve that content and bring that to the world who's trying to use that to improve their organizations. We also do have a very different approach to DevOps. We have a outcome-based approach to DevOps. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into the webinar today. Apart from that, the journey for business agility requires various other things in the mix. And what we do as your partners is to take you through that journey as if we are in it together, take every business scenario that you have and help you go past that and see what you can do to thrive your business in this competitive market. That's a little bit about Icon. Mark, let's get started into the webinar. Okay, so everyone knows this word Agile. It's been in the industry for so long. We know that Agile is the answer to a lot of different things, but one thing that we miss about Agile, or while going through the transformation of Agile, is how do we scale it? How do we have the right kind of quality scaling it? How do we sustain agility in our industry? What is it that makes us an Agile organization? I mean, these are questions that's always being asked. There are no answers to it so far. There's different versions of answers to it. So today, what we're going to do here is take you through a little bit of our experience with the companies that we have dealt with and what we feel is business agility and how an Agile business should be in the market and how quality is so important in this whole process. So, okay, so the very definition of business agility, this is from my good friends at BAI and ATI. It is the ability to adapt to change, learn and pivot, deliver at speed, and thrive in a competitive market. Thrive being that important word, because today the bigger businesses that were there in our industry are no longer the leaders or market leaders in the industry. More than 80% of those businesses are either taken over by smaller, faster companies that are greenfield, that have come into the market, understand their customer really well, and they have taken over those bigger giants in no time. So our goals here should be to thrive in that market, continuously try and improve, try to become a learning organization, try to have those growth items in our backlogs to improve. So to do that, I mean, the important thing here is to take that journey and look at the company in a holistic way. So the journey of agility started, I mean, we all started at some level with team agility in the beginning, and then we are stuck at this stage where we are trying to scale it. While scaling it, we are finding places that does not fit into our scaling process. Some of that being the HR, the audit process, the legal process. So how do we bring synergy to all of these areas? One reason why this is represented as gears in my slide here is because it has a direct analogy to the gear system. Now, if any one of these gears are not working, then at the end of the day, you're not going to see the result that you're expecting. So for us to see the kind of results that we want from an Agile organization, each of these gears should work hand in hand. And again, just by working, is that enough? No, it has to work with quality. It has to actually bring out the value in what we are trying to deliver. So we are going to go look into a little bit more detail about how this is being done. A value stream, the process in which we take a concept from the very beginning stage of it being an idea to the stage where we deliver it and we get some value delivery out of the door to our customer. It could be realized in cash, it could be realized in value delivery for them. So this whole process is divided into two different stages. One stage is where you take this process and you take the idea, build that idea, and try and bring that to life. And the other process is to take that built value through a series of process before it is delivered to the customer. What is that series of process? We always use this term, test it, nail it, and scale it. The reason why we say test it, nail it, and scale it is you need to know that it can be built, it can be tested. You need to know that it can be, it's a very good quality, that it would not fail. So you're testing it again. And before you scale it, you want to be sure that it has passed all your testing and quality process to that level that you are satisfied. If you were the customer buying it, you would buy it before you send it off to your real customer. So the importance of going through a value stream is to understand how it goes through that process before it reaches your customer, keeping your customer as the focus every stage of your way. I'm pretty sure you guys have seen the V diagram in multiple areas, multiple stages. This is here, this is the core foundation of how value flows from one area to the other and where we find challenges in each of these areas, right? Strategy being one of the core pieces with which a company starts, their business. Most of the companies, they have their strategies built out, but it's not communicated downstream. So when the strategy is not communicated downstream, we do have problems which arises when it comes down to the place where the work items are situated or where the teams are working. Now, what we want to do is try and make work visible throughout this area so that the strategies and the epics, the features, everyone can see all of these things at any given point of time. We want to make this work visible, and that's why the importance of value stream came into the picture in the last few years, and it's been so important that we stress on the fact that you go and identify your value streams and then work through improving that value streams with quality processes put in place. One thing that you guys would have seen is the measurement platforms. Do you measure everything, or do you measure things that has gone only to deployment? Today in the market, most of the companies, they only look at measurements at the deployment stage or while it's going to the deployment stage. Those are impact metrics that we are always focused on. We forget that there are other things to measure. We want to measure what happens when an idea flows from strategy to the portfolio, that it goes to the epic, what happens to that epic. So we want that. We want to tie that back when it goes into a release platform as well. So we want to measure everything throughout this V stream that you see here and make sure that we are able to correct course at each and every stage. Now, when I am talking about correcting course, what I'm trying to talk about is quality. Again, quality being the key word there. We want quality to be a part of our process from the strategy until the release that gets to the customer. We often take quality as only one piece where we actually go into the development process and we say that quality is associated with testing process. And we try to improve that testing process. We try to say that quality rests here. It doesn't go beyond this. In actual reality, the quality process goes much way beyond the testing process. It goes from the idea, the conception of the idea, to adding value to the customer. In Scaled Agile, we talk about this in a very different way. If you have seen this, this is the latest and greatest diagram of SAFe, which is our journey towards business agility and how SAFe has described it in different ways. Here we talk I'm going to focus just on the major things here today that we're talking about is quality. So we're going to talk about the continuous delivery pipeline. You can see from this diagram that the continuous delivery pipeline sits right there at that team's level where you're delivering value. And it goes through different cycles. It talks about exploration, integration, and deployment. Now, exploration is a stage that you can relate to what I was talking about with strategy and ideas that comes into place. Integration is a place where you actually develop something and you're going and building quality in through that process of testing, unit testing, API testing. And then the last and final thing is continuous deployment. Again, quality being the focus with continuous deployment as well. So we are building quality in through each of these areas before we go and reach with the delivery to our customer. And when the customer gets that in hand, or when the value has been delivered, we are so sure that we have taken all necessary steps to build that quality in from the beginning, that it is not going to fail, or it is not going to go and break something like we spin wheels today in our environments, right? So we want to avoid that. So we try to build that quality in from the beginning. Now, Scaled Agile, in terms of DevOps, we have divided that continuous exploration, integration, and deployment into 4 different quadrants here, and 16 different subdimensions that you can see. And we focus on quality from that initial stage until the last stage, which is learn, where you're going and measuring something and you're learning back and trying to add those improvement items back to the system. Now, when we go through this, 4 dimensions, we are also talking about, the entire growth portal that's associated with it. And we want to see how we can get better through each and every stage of this process. Now, from an company standpoint, when we come in and try to help you guys, we try to help you at each of these stages in a process standpoint on how you can get better. But there are other things that is needed to build quality in and to make this process more seamless and automated and get faster to the market. So when it comes to continuous integration, there are tools that help us build that quality in and make you faster in achieving that delivered value. So to look at that in a little bit of a different way, what is security and quality? How do you build that into the system? Now, at the continuous integration piece of it, we do have 4 different subdimensions that you can see. So we are building in quality through development, through the build, to the test, and to the staging process. We need to have all of those built in. If we have to do this manually each and every time, we're going to have problems. So when we talk about DevOps and the applications of DevOps, you must have heard that automation is kind of the most common sought after word that we go into and why that is so important. Today, we'll discuss why that piece is so important and how that's going to help us achieve quality built into our process, and how that can bring in the value delivery with the highest quality and speed as possible. So I'm going to hand this over to Mark, and he's going to walk us through what is this continuous quality and why is it so important. Mark?
Thanks very much, Nishant. And yeah, it's really good to hear the word quality constantly as we're talking about at business agility, and not just the word testing. The reason why I say that, and you'll see here on my slide, I even have it testing stricken through. That's because you cannot test quality into an application. You don't test to make something better. You test to make sure you have built something better. So today what we're going to talk about is we are going to pick apart these different sectors of the radar, and we're going to talk about what practices we can put into each of these. Now, I'm not going to talk about everything within the sectors. I'm going to just highlight some specific phases and some specific techniques and practices. And I'm also not going to go into super detail on each of them because we don't have the time today. But what I will do is I'll touch upon the techniques and how you can apply them and kind of the reason behind each of those. So first phase that we're going to focus on the development and build phase. This is obviously, we've defined our stories. We've got the requirements clearly defined. We know what we're going to build. Let's go ahead and start building it. This is where we need to apply industry best practices and do deep code analysis to uncover security and reliability issues within the code base. Now, many people will probably be familiar with open source technologies or kind of simple linting tools, kind of along the lines of SonarQube, for example, and they're valuable. They'll get you going, but what you have to do is you have to focus on deep reliability and security issues, because that's where you're actually building in quality and identifying those issues early in the process so that your practices get better. We then move on to unit testing, and certainly we can start talking about TDD, test-driven development, during our development and build phases as well, where we are defining our requirements through the use of defining what the tests should look like. Obviously, BDD also comes into this world as well, and how we can leverage frameworks like Cucumber, for example, to kind of define what the functionality should look like, and then use that definition in turn to do the automated validation later. Now, BDD is a whole other topic that I could spend another hour on in itself, but one of the things that you want to be thinking about when you're talking about BDD and TDD practices, they should be done at the beginning of the process. Many people look at BDD at the end of the process as a way of doing test automation at our higher levels of the application. But really, you should be looking at it as a way of making sure we've defined the right thing and that we're building a more quality process. Now, once I've actually built something and I've kind of validated at the granular code level, I can then actually start to move higher up in the application and focus on doing end-to-end test automation. Here, we're going to be talking about API testing and UI testing. So testing not just of the user interface, the thing that the human touches, but also validating the underlying API calls. Many of today's modern web applications are built on top of REST APIs. Those REST APIs are consumed by the front-end UI, but also consumed by other external applications as well. This is the way that we get much more rich applications and rich functionality out to the client in the most rapid way possible. We're going to talk about UI and API testing in more detail. I'm going to show you a brief demonstration of how you can do these two things very quickly. But also you need to be thinking not just about your functional validation, making sure that the story is implemented and implemented correctly, but you also want to make sure that you're satisfying your non-functional business requirements. Typically, security and performance are normally those two primary ones. Then we actually rinse and repeat these end-to-end testing practices again when we go to deployment. Whether that's deployment internally to some kind of staging integration environment, or whether it's deployment publicly and out to your client, it really depends upon your own situation. But what you want to be doing is to look at how you can take those same practices that you were doing kind of pre-deployment or pre-production and using them again in your staging and deployment environments to do continuous validation to make sure that you've not introduced defects or regressions as you start assembling the system together as a whole. Now, there's a lot of pieces here, and we are going to talk about a couple of these in more detail, but just to put them all kind of into context, one of the questions that I'll often get when I talk to clients is, how much is enough? Code coverage is a number that you can use to do that. Test coverage is another, where I can actually start looking at how much of my user stories have been tested, and we'll actually be showing that and talking about that today. But one of the other ways that many organizations look to is what's referred to as the testing pyramid. Very popular within Agile development teams, really promoted by Martin Fowler and Michael Cohen. Certainly, this is something that we strongly believe at Parasoft is the right way of organizing your test automation portfolio. What this says is do a lot of unit tests, back them up with API tests, and then have a smaller number of UI-centric tests and even smaller number of manual regression tests. What you want to do is you want to reserve your manual testing activities for the most valuable parts of your application. Exploratory testing, testing of things which are just really, really difficult to automate, testing of things which are business critical, and doing additional validations. Don't use your manual testing practices as a way of doing mundane regressions. Humans are really bad at repetitive tasks. We're really good at creative stuff. Machines, it's the other way around. So here what we're saying is, let's minimize and optimize the top of the testing pyramid. You want to optimize the testing practices because the higher you get on the pyramid, the harder they are to diagnose, and also the longer they take to perform or execute. Now, we'll talk about this in a second. We'll actually look at our our survey results before the webinar. I'm going to run a quick poll. But the thing that is often missing when people talk about the testing pyramid is making sure that I'm building it on top of solid ground to start with. This is where that deep code analysis that we talked about a moment ago comes in, and we'll touch upon that today. We won't go into details of it. We'll actually, as I mentioned earlier, we are running a webinar series right now, and we'll actually be talking about static analysis specifically for embedded safety-critical applications actually tomorrow, so you can actually subscribe to that by going to the Parasoft website. So let's just talk a little bit about the audience today, though. So prior to the webinar today, we had a question in there, which was, How much automation have you implemented in your software testing practice? Now, as you can see, 2/3 of the audience have little or none. This is very common. What we see is that many organizations are still struggling to figure out how to do the test automation, either because their application is very complex, or maybe the skill set of the team isn't as technically deep, or maybe the test environment itself is kind of unstable or unavailable. All of these things are solvable. And actually at Parasoft, we have a range of products. We have over a portfolio of over 9 products covering everything that you need from a test automation and a continuous quality perspective. So we'll talk about how we can address some of these. You'll also notice that there's probably about up to 18% of our audience have high levels of test automation. So this is either 100%, you've got everything done. 3% of our audience said that. You guys are doing really well. Why are you even on this webinar? Then you've got 15% of the audience have at least 75% code coverage or at 75% test automation. Normally, you want to shoot for around about 70, 80%. That's a really good number. If you can get higher than that, great, but usually law of diminishing returns kicks in. Those folks which are halfway there, probably you're kind of hitting some basic roadblocks that we could probably dig apart a little bit. But it's important to kind of ask what types of testing you're doing. So we're going to run a quick poll, and there are 5 options in the poll. And the question is, what types of test automation are you currently doing? So just click all the ones that apply. The first, actually, let me see if I can trigger the poll. It's not triggering. Okay. Just bear with me here. Okay, so unfortunately, we're having difficulty running the poll. Just bear with me a second. Oh, it is running. Okay, sorry. Thank you for that. I'm not seeing it on my screen. Okay, so running through the poll, let's say check all that apply. There's a 5th option there at the bottom, which says, but it's not enough. So if you're not happy with your levels of test automation, tick that one as well. Also, the first one is that you're doing nothing. So go ahead and tick that if you're all manual. It's going to be interesting to see what we get from the audience today. I typically run this kind of survey on a regular basis to see how the industry is doing. And I actually have some kind of anecdotal data in the next slide. So we'll see if today's audience kind of overlaps with that. Okay, let's stop running the poll and then let's look at the results. And okay, for some reason, there's something wrong with the poll. So you know what, we're going to skip over this and we're going to just kind of move on. Normally what we find is that the majority of people don't really or identify more with an ice cream cone or an inverted pyramid than the test pyramid itself. And that's because organizations typically have very UI-centric testing practices. The UI is easier to understand, therefore it's easier to test. However, it's much harder to automate. And certainly the lower you get down into the testing practice, though, while it's easier to execute your tests as you move further down the pyramid, the lower levels require deeper, more technical expertise. So we'll talk about that and how we can melt the ice cream curve a little bit, or the ice cream cone a little bit. And we're also going to talk about this middle layer, this API testing layer. This was actually one of the things I was hoping to just get from our poll just now. But what we do find is many organizations are still struggling with testing of the APIs. And this is often the case when organizations don't understand how those APIs are actually used in the real world. You create a number of transactional APIs, but then how they're chained together is kind of up to your clients. So we'll talk about how we can take kind of the manual interactions and feed those in. Okay, so the different testing practices that we'll talk about, obviously, As I'm working through my pipeline, as I'm working through my development process, it all starts with the work item. We'll actually be showing version 1 today. We'll look at the backlog, and then typically what you're going to go through is you're going to go through a series of activities. We're going to start with code analysis. This is where we are trying to identify deviations from industry best practices that we know can lead to reliability and security issues. There are a broad range of industry standards out there. Typically for security, we're talking about CERT, CWE, or OWASP. When you're talking about reliability, especially in safety critical applications such as automotive, you're talking about things like MISRA and AutoZAR. As I said, we'll be touching upon these in some webinars that we're running over the next few weeks, so you'll look out for that email from the Parasoft team. But all of this is about prevention versus detection. You can find some defects through the use of static code analysis, but what you want to do is you actually want to push down the curve. So you don't only just want to kind of shift left the detection of defects, you want to reduce the number of defects introduced in the first place, building quality into your software development process from the start. Now, as we start moving across the testing practices, though, the rest of them are, or the quality practices, now we're into testing, and we have to say, okay, well, what do I want to do? Well, I have a defined story in my system of record in version 1 or Jira or wherever. And then that story may have an acceptance test associated with it. Now, this is, if you're more using a TDD oriented practice, or frankly, just general best practices around software development, you want to define what you're going to build it, but you really want to define how you're going to test it. Now, I have this as a little dotted box because not everybody does that. Sometimes it's not practical. Sometimes you're in time crunch. Sometimes your process just isn't quite that mature. So I view that as somewhat optional in the real world. Ideally not, obviously. Ideally, we would want to have that defined. Now, the next thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to say, how do I want to test that, that story? And this is where I now make the choice. Am I going to do it manual or am I going to do it automated? And if I'm going to do it automated, am I going to use a unit testing framework such as JUnit? Or am I going to create tests at a higher level using API tests, using technology like Parasoft SOA test that we'll show you today? Or am I going to use test through the UI, and am I going to use some test automation technology there? Now, we'll be talking about Selenium today. Selenium is by far the de facto industry standard when it comes to automation of web UIs, and I'm going to show you how we can create UI tests and associate them with my user stories by interacting with the application through a Chrome browser. Now, the key thing, though, is once I have my automation, I need to actually start aggregating that data together so I can get a centralized view of my software development process and the quality of my deliveries. Now, that gives me the ability to aggregate the data from code analysis, from unit testing, from end-to-end testing, get me complete coverage, both at the code level, but also how it's associated back with those work items. So here, what we want to do is we want to take the data from our testing runs and send the results of that back into our original system of record. We also want to be able to, in essence, cross-correlate all of my different test artifacts into a centralized traceability report, or a traceability view right within my quality dashboard as well. And then lastly, one of the things I probably won't show you today, but one of the things that we also have the ability to do is within that quality dashboard, if I identify a regression test or a failing regression or even a security issue within my code base, I can easily, from within the quality dashboard, create a work item directly within my Agile planning system. Now, this is an important one because what you don't want to do is you don't want to just automatically create defects in your system of record when tests start failing. The reason being is test automation isn't as stable as you think it would be. All you need is one piece of system outage and you will have hundreds or thousands of tests failing. You don't want to create hundreds or thousands of defects. You want to put a human in the loop and have that human triage the process, and that's what the quality dashboard gives me the ability to do. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to step through and kind of run through a brief demonstration of how we can implement some of these testing processes into my application. I'm not going to touch around the static analysis and the best practices. As I said, we're going to cover that in other webinars that we're running over the next few weeks. Today, I'm going to focus just on the functional automation piece, and I'm going to go quick. So we're going to touch upon these pieces, and I said earlier we will actually be doing additional webinars on these. So again, look out for that email. So if I go ahead and just bring in let's bring in Chrome. So here I have my application that I'm testing. So this is my application that my development team have just implemented. It's a banking application. I'm going to just quickly log on to make sure it's working because this is actually a public server and somebody was taking it down earlier today. So I want to just make sure that it's okay. Yep, okay, looks fine. Okay, now what I do want to do though is I want to create a test to validate some new functionality within the application. Now let's go ahead and actually look at my version 1 environment. So here I've got version 1, here I've got my backlog. We're going to come back and look at some of these stories later, but actually it's this one right here that I wanted to create some validation for today. This B01564, okay? So we're going to come back to that in a second. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually start recording my interactions with my UI. Now, I'm actually going to do two things at the same time. I'm actually going to record my UI interactions, and I'm going to convert those into Selenium tests. We'll do that in one of my IDEs. I actually have 2 Eclipse IDEs up and running on my machine. And then the second thing that I'm going to be doing this in parallel, is I'm actually going to be monitoring what underlying API calls my application is making to the backend system. And I'm then going to convert those API calls into a test scenario within Parasoft SOA test. So let's go ahead and do that. So start recording. And John demo. And that's the username password. So, all right, we've got a bunch of accounts. I'm now going to go ahead and say update contact information. John Smith, I'm going to give this Mark Lambert. And I'm going to say update profile. And I'm going to go back and just validate. Yep, Mark Lambert's there. Let's go ahead and change that back. Okay. Make sure you changed back. Yes, great. Log out. Okay, that's my test. I'm done. So now I'm going to go ahead and actually stop recording. And I've just got a quick two-step dialogue. So here, first of all, I'm going to give myself a test name. Update profile is the name of my test. I'm going to give it a description. I'm going to say, update the profile to Mark and then back to John, okay? I'm also going to associate this with a work item. Here I'm going to associate with it using an @rec tag, which is associated with a requirement or a user story. And I'm going to give that same number that we had previously in my prior example. I could actually embed a URL here, but because we have this integration already in place for version 1, I don't need the URL. I'm going to say download that recording, update profile. Let's just stick that in this JSON folder. Okay. And then it takes me to my second step in my dialogue. So here I'm going to actually create API traffic for Parasoft SOA test. It's actually going to do this by talking to a server that's running also on my laptop. And it's going to actually create me API tests. It's sending the traffic. The API tests are then going to, or SOA tests are going to then analyze that traffic. And it actually has created me an API test already. So we'll come back to that and look at that in a second. Okay. So I've done with my UI. Let's go ahead and dismiss my application. And I'm actually going to now start creating a Selenium test. I'm going to do this directly within my Eclipse IDE. We can do this for both Eclipse and IntelliJ, but today we'll focus on Eclipse. I have some example projects here. I could actually create a new project for my recording, but I'm actually going to add this to an existing project. So here I have a project that was created. It's got some test classes, and then it's actually using something referred to as the page object model. This is a very powerful way of creating those Selenium tests, which means that they are more maintainable from the start. In essence, my page objects are stored all in one place, and then I can update those actions centrally, and then those actions get reused across different tests. Now, what I want to do now, though, is very quickly add to my existing package. I'm going to go ahead and add that UI recording that I just did right here. And I'm going to say it's in package PowerRank. I'm going to call this account details test and just click finish. So here what Parasoft Selenic has done is it's taken that recording and it's creating me a JUnit test that has 0 vendor lock. What does that mean? That means that this is a pure Java JUnit test with no embedded Parasoft technology within it. I could take these tests and run them as part of my CI/CD process with, seamlessly, just kind of straight out of the gate. Here you can see it's actually built my test using my page object model. You can also see it's added a Java annotation here, which is what's going to give me that traceability back to the original requirement, and we'll run through that in a minute. And then what I can do is I could actually just go ahead and run these tests very quickly against my application. Now this should run quick. We'll see, we should have a browser come up here. So I've got a couple of different tests that are already there. There's a bill pay one that just flew through there. We've got another one right now, which is going to do, oh, that's my user profile one, just got integrated in. And then this last one is a loan request. So all 3 of those are running pretty quick. And then you've got a little accounts overview test as well. So we actually had 4 tests there. They all ran successfully. As I said, these are pure Java tests that can, or JUnit tests that can be plugged into my CI/CD process. But the thing about creating UI tests is, as I mentioned earlier, is that there's actually a lot of complexity, and actually UIs change a lot. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to rerun these same tests, but against a new version of my application. And the development team have said, hey, there's some functionality that's changed. Now, you're going to see some interesting things happen here. And actually, I'm kind of cutting down the kind of the demonstration sequence. So here you see we're stalled. The application is for some reason not able to complete this test. It looks like the UI is the same, but what has actually happened is the development team have actually injected a new field there, which has broken my UI. Well, it looks like my update profile one worked. Which are we doing now? Quick, okay, now we're applying for a loan. Okay, something else is not quite working. We've got some dynamic content there. So we have 2 tests that just failed. Okay, and then we're going to do an account overview, which also looks like, oh no, that guy looked like that worked. Okay, so we had 2 tests that failed. And what we really need to do now, though, is to understand how we can fix those tests. And because we were using Parasoft Selenic as part of my execution process, Parasoft Selenic is able to give me information about why those tests were failing. So it does this by applying AI and machine learning to the historical analysis and giving me recommendations. That's what this little green light bulb means, little recommendations which can tell me how I can modify my test so that I can fix it based upon those changes that were made to the UI. Now, this heuristics can be applied at runtime, automatically applying these heuristics to try and move forward in your CI/CD process. But the key thing here is that we're bringing this back into the developer's IDE, or the developer tester's IDE, so I can very quickly jump to the test that failed. I can jump directly to the locator on the page, which is no longer valid, and then I can apply those same recommendations and update that locator. So by doing that, I very quickly, with in essence 2 clicks, updated my test and fixed the problem associated with the test automation in this case. Now, there's a lot more that I can show you from the point of view of the UI automation with Selenium and Parasoft Selenic, but we can leave that for another conversation. The thing that I said that I was doing in parallel is I was actually doing automation of the APIs as well. So those UI interactions were actually calling some back-end services. And what I'm doing here is I'm bringing up my second Eclipse IDE that actually has Parasoft SOA test within it. So here is my update profile test that I was running earlier, or that, use case that I did earlier. Here, if I look at my test suite, I can see that my test has been automatically associated with my user story as well. It's been tagged as belonging to 1564. And then these individual steps represent the underlying REST APIs that were called as part of that user interaction. But the key thing is these REST APIs are not just simple atomic transactions. They actually depend upon each other. So for example, I have a endpoint that is making a query for the accounts for a particular customer. And what I'm able to do is extract the customer ID from my payload of that first service and pass it in to this call to the second service as an argument. And Parasoft SOA test did that automatically. It analyzed the traffic, applied its AI machine learning heuristics, and tried to do some pattern matching with probabilities. The more that it does this, the more that you train it, the smarter that it gets. So this capability of Parasoft SOA test helps me really embed the business rules directly into my API tests. And these API tests run a lot quicker than a UI test because I don't have to stand up the Chrome browser. I don't have to stand up all of my UI infrastructure. I can focus on the underlying backend piece. And then these tests, along with my Selenium tests, can be executed as part of my CI/CD pipeline, and that data aggregated within my dashboard and sent back to version 1 or my Agile planning system. So here, for example, I'm going to pick on a different story. I'm actually going to pick on the view accounts story here. I look at view accounts, my backlog element, and I can see that there are actually 18 tests associated with view accounts. And here I'm inside of version 1, and I can see my different test artifacts. And you can see in this case, there's a mixture of Java JUnit test cases, as well as tests that were created with Parasoft SOA test. And these link, the details of these link directly to the reporting and analytics dashboard. So I can see here details around the test failure, and then I can link back to my reporting and analytics dashboard. And in fact, actually, well, let's go ahead and do that. I think I might need to reset something to, yeah, let's just go ahead and clear that guy for now. So here is where I can see my individual tests associated with a particular user story. And here is where I can get access to all the details. Now, this is a transaction or an individual test. Obviously, this is one part of a bigger test suite. So I can actually go up to the top level dashboard within the reporting and analytics dashboard to get that higher level view of the overall quality practices that are going on within my development process. So here you can see I've got some security data. I actually have code coverage and advanced analytics running around here as well, telling me how much of my code was tested as I was going. And then also I can go and actually look at a traceability report to see how well I'm doing from a traceability perspective against each of those backlog items, or in this case, it's also configured to show me defects as well that are inside of version 1. So again, let's go ahead and pick on a different one. Let's pick on this withdrawal and transfer. And this withdrawal and transfer, you can see all of the individual tests that are associated with that user story or that backlog item. and then I can actually drill down into the details. So again, let's go ahead and drill into one of these ones that's failing. And here I can actually see the trace elements. I can see the information as to why they're failing. I can look at the underlying traffic of the API. So this is actually a SOAP service that we're interrogating to. I can also correlate code coverage as well. We don't have code coverage for this example. Let's just go ahead and just step back and look at the code. Let's just look at the code coverage on the dashboard. So I can actually look at not just the coverage from the point of view of the individual stories, but I can also look at the underlying code and see what tests are associated with analyzing a particular test class. This code coverage can be done not only for unit tests, which is a very typical practice to look at code coverage for unit tests, but it can also be done for the functional test automation as well, of the API tests and the Selenium UI tests. Okay, so as I said, a very quick overview and a very quick step through each of those capabilities. We showed when we were looking at the UI, how we could record the user interactions and then create these pure Selenium, pure Java tests directly within the IDE. I used Eclipse today. And then using the AI and machine learning to detect when a change happens to the UI, how you can update the tests and how you can maintain them. I said there's a lot more within Selenium that we can talk about, but we'll be going into that into more detail in a webinar in a couple of weeks. We then also showed how we could create API tests very quickly. And we did that here by monitoring the UI and monitoring the interactions with the UI. We can also create API tests kind of from design rather than just from use. So you can use your Swagger documents, or if you're doing web services, your WSDLs, and you can use these to build individual test steps and chain them together before even the UI is up and ready at all. And then lastly, we showed how we can bring this all together through traceability, hooking it into version 1 or into your agile planning system. Those tests, to achieve that, what you're doing is you're integrating your testing practices into your CI/CD pipeline, and then that data getting aggregated inside of the reporting and analytics dashboard allows us to get that centralized view of quality. Okay, so a lot of things. We have a little time for questions. So what I will say is put the questions in the chat in the questions dialog. I see some chat messages. We'll look at those in a second as well. And then if you go to the parasoft.com website, you click on the contact button in the top right. Feel free to reach out to us if you'd like some more detail, if you'd like some more information around the webinar series as well. So let's go ahead and look at the questions. And I'm going to just quickly scan here and pick one for you, Nishant, so I can read the rest of them while you're answering that. Sure. Okay, here we go. So do you see quality only to apply to the development phase or the process as a whole?
That's a good question, Mark. The process in general, I mean, quality is applied to be built from the beginning until the end. It should not be seen as a process only for the development side. Like you explained, yeah, I mean, it's very important that we build quality in throughout the process.
Yeah, and I obviously focus on kind of the practices that fit when you start doing the development. But I think your point there is really valid, that you can't be thinking quality as an afterthought. It has to be right from the beginning. I mean, it's also It's one of those things where, you know, I made this statement earlier, right? You can't test quality into an application. Testing is a verification. And likewise, if you don't have the process set up front, and if you're not defining your stories properly, if you're not doing the ideation process properly, you're going to get poor quality. It might be faster, or it might be more agile, but the quality is not going to increase. Okay, I've got like 2 or 3 other questions. I think we can get through to those easy. Okay, so one comment was, does this only work with version 1? So short answer to that question is no. So we actually support number of different systems. Jira, obviously, a lot of clients use. Jira has a number of limitations when you're talking about agile scaling. Also, it does have some limitations when you're talking about test management as well. So I'll turn over to you, Nishant, in a second around Jira and kind of how to use it for scaling. But when you're talking about test management, Jira does not have native test management capabilities within it. So when you're trying to associate test results with the artifacts, you need to use one of their plugins. We actually have an integration with X-Ray. We actually use X-Ray ourselves internally, and we think it's a really very powerful technology. We have others such as Qtest and Zephyr are currently in development. They'll be available later this year. We also integrate with other systems as well. So Polarian and Codebeamer are both very popular within safety critical industries. So we integrate with those two. And we have a number of other integrations with other technologies in that industry as well. Did you want to talk to using Jira for scaling and kind of if that's a good thing, a bad thing, or if somebody should be looking at something else?
So, sure, Mark. Jira has been in the industry for a very long time. I mean, it was a tool that was initially used for event management. It's like incident management system. And because of that popularity, I mean, people, could easily move into a space for agile development and management. Now, is that the right tool or is that another tool? Tools are only things that will work if there is culture and if there's agility built into the system. Tools are great. I mean, it depends on how we look at the system and how the company is going through it. I mean, based on their usage, we can decide on the tools. So I would not say one tool is better than the other. The reason being each tool has got its own, the pros and cons to it, but it's more about how we are using it and how we see value delivery out of it. Jira, however, has got a Jira Align on top of it today, which is a great thing. I mean, it's one step towards getting to that strategy piece of it. So yes, they have done a lot of job in connecting those two pieces, but still there's a large gap there because it was not built as an agile tool. So there's a little bit of gap in there, which, again, by the way we use it, we can actually bridge that gap. So that'll be my stand for that. Yeah,
good. Thank you. I know that's something you and I have talked about several times over the years. So yeah. Okay, a couple of more kind of tactical ones. I think one is hey, how does this integrate into Jenkins? So obviously Jenkins being CI, CD pipeline, it's very straightforward. So the Selenium tests that I mentioned, these are pure Selenium. Just plug them in as you do today. You can actually plug in Parasoft Selenic directly into your CI pipeline as well. It's a one-line code change, and then you get all of the AI recommendations, and the self-healing is all enabled. SOA test also has a command line interface as well, so you can execute the tests from a command line, but it also has a server, which can be, it's an always up server mode, and you can make REST calls to that. We actually have plugins specifically for Jenkins, Bamboo, TeamCity, and Azure DevOps. And these plugins will actually trigger your SOA tests if they're running on the server. And they will also consume the test results from execution of any of the Parasoft products and put those test results back inside of the pipeline. So you can gate your pipeline based upon the results of the run. In addition, obviously, the results can also be sent to their centralized reporting dashboard. So you're aggregating all of these things together over time. So hopefully that answered that question. And then the last question is, what about performance testing? The performance testing, we can take the existing test artifacts of the API tests or the Selenium tests and use those to generate load. This is one of the things that we feel is really a new way of looking at performance testing and saying, how can I reuse the artifacts we're already creating? In addition, combining those two techniques together, so combining both UI and API testing to do kind of a hybrid approach to performance testing. It makes it easier to scale. So you can put your system under load through the use of the APIs, which are much easier to scale. And then you use a small number of your UI tests to validate the functional behaviors. We also have other capabilities in Parasoft Selenic around performance monitoring of your tests as part of the CI/CD pipeline. So there's a lot of things there that we can do from an early stage perspective. But one of the things that we do see that many organizations struggle when they're doing performance testing is the test environment itself, and having it either available or available at the capacity and throughput that you require to do your performance test. This is where service virtualization comes in, and we didn't really talk about that today. It's actually on this prior slide, kind of on the right-hand side there. Service virtualization is a technology where you can simulate your back-end dependencies, and it really unlocks the potential for doing early-stage performance testing. So there's a lot of pieces there, and I know I'm advertising the upcoming webinar series a lot, but actually we do have a webinar scheduled for May where we're going to be talking about exactly this thing. So I think with that being said, I think we actually touched upon everything. Yeah, it looks like the rest of the chat was just, yeah, sorry that the poll wasn't working. There's something strange there. Recording will be available. Slides will be available as well. As I said, look for an email from the Parasoft team either later today or over the next couple of days, kind of telling you about other webinars that we have going on over the next month. So with that being said, I think we've done everything. Nishant, thank you very much for co-presenting with me today. This was a really great session. I'm glad we got to share this conversation with the rest of the world.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for joining us in this session.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Take care. Have a good rest of your day. Be safe. And we look forward to seeing you on one of the upcoming webinars.